Hello and welcome back to Behind the Faders, the channel where we talk about all aspects of live sound mixing and live sound in general. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel. It's free for you, doesn't cost you anything. It's so helpful for me. And while I'm so grateful for these many views over this short period of time, more than 90% of people watching my channel haven't subscribed. So, today is part 2 of our little series about how to create a professional desk file which helps you do your job easily and conveniently. Last time we did the basic setup of a file, and today I'm going to walk you through the entire default settings for each channel the way I do it. So let's dive into it, shall we? So, back to our input layer. I'm going to walk you through all my default settings for each channel now. In general, when it comes to EQ, there are two different ways of preparing a default EQ. The first method is, of course, you just dial it in, like here on my kick drum. And that mostly goes for channels where we know we have to treat them. I mean, a drum kit in the pop rock world needs treatment. We all know that. We don't like to listen to natural drum kit sound in these genres. So we will have to do something about it. I'll walk you through the single settings in a minute. But the second way to prepare a default EQ is, let's go to our guitar right here. As you can see, it's flat. However, if there's problems, I prepared some EQs and just didn't really engage them. So like if I find some harshness that I don't like, there's one prepared at 2.5. In case of nasal things, there's around 800, 900. And if the low mids are a bit much, another one at 355. But they're not doing anything. They're just prepared. They sit there in case I need them. So if I do need them, and let's just say I'm on a console and I have a console with no touch screen, all I need to do now is grab the gain knob of the equalizer and bring the filter in. Also, in general, all the dynamics that I'm using in this, by the time I start the sound check, the threshold is always wide open. They're not doing anything until I bring the threshold down. So let's start with a kick drum. First off, yes, I high pass even the kick drum, because even the kick drum doesn't need to go all the way down. And it's also a bit of a safety net, because if you may be using an kind of dated system that maybe doesn't have a limiter to protect it. And also, like older loudspeakers tend to have their deepest resonance frequency at around 37 hertz. That's different for really modern loudspeakers, but you never know. And so I usually set a high pass at 40. Then this one around 60, 65, that's where I expect the bottom end of a kick drum working the best. Then of course above that you have to bring in a cut in the low mids. I prepared this at 250. This is a filter you will have to move around a bit when you sound check. And then for the attack, there's different approaches. I usually set one at 2.5 and one around 6-7K. You could also just have like a high shelf from here. That's something you have to develop for yourself, but this works pretty well for me. So that's my default EQ for kick drum. As for dynamics, if I need it, I will set up a compressor with a really slow attack and a fast release. So this compressor will then let the transient through, so the attack, and then bring it down. Gives a little bit more punch in case you need it. Ratio is like 2.5 to 1, so it's not very severe. When it comes to the monitor channel of the kick drum, here it is. This is really all I do to it. You know, I learned this from an old friend of mine who used to be one of the most successful monitor engineers in Germany, now retired. That's all I'm doing. It's a big dip at around 500, maybe a little bit wide, so like this. And guess what? For most cases, that works. I mean, sometimes, of course, you need a high pass as well. And it can be pretty high really, because the drummer gets all the bottom end from the front PA, so he doesn't need that in the monitors. Sometimes they will ask for a little attack, so I prepared that here, but most of the time I get away with this. And oh, and by the way, in general, there are no dynamics on the monitor channels. And that's another thing that's so convenient with monitor channels. Once you walk the extra mile and set them up, after that they do nothing but make your life easier. Because most of these channels don't even have an EQ. And nowadays you can really talk to the band and ask them if they are willing and capable to control their own monitoring after the initial sound check, and just give them your iPad. And since most bands these days have something like a little tablet controlled desk in their rehearsal space to do their monitoring, they will be more than happy to do it. And they have their own channels. But this, just coming back to this is another reason why it's so important to label your stuff in a way that it's really obvious where you are. So you can tell them the purple channels with no capital letters are yours, starting at 25. So they don't mess with your front of house channels. It's really convenient. Okay, let's get on with snare top. High pass at 160. This is where I expect the body around 200. Actually, it's a bit lower than that, around 200 really. Then is something that I don't see very often, but it works really well for me. I make a pretty narrow boost around 1.6K, and that gives me this knuck sound that I really like. Where the treble sits is really a matter of taste where you want it. I prepared around 6, and right above that I roll it off to reduce the bleed from the hi-hat a little bit at 8K. Of course, you will have to play around with these filters a little. As for the compressors, pretty much the same as for the kick drum. Well, this is 3-to-1. Long attack, short release. Monitor channel, a little bit of a high cut, and that's it. I don't do anything to monitor channels unless I really have to. So to make this shorter, maybe for all the other monitor channels, the only difference will be the vocal at the end. I set up a high pass, a low cut, pretty much similar to the one I use front of house, and that's it. Okay, snare bottom, if you have it. Of course, very important, flip the polarity switch, because obviously that membrane moves into a different direction than the snare top mic. Other than that, high pass 180, low pass at, well, 11. Could bring that down a little. Doesn't really matter. The only thing that might happen in the snare bottom, if I really have too much of the sizzle of the actual snare, I might give it a little bump here around 3K or so. But that's something I just prepared, but I don't take it in advance. Hi-hat, just a low cut. That's it. And don't forget to turn the phantom power on. Nothing else. Rack tom. Let's talk about toms real quick. Toms are very often badly tuned. It's just a fact. Many drummers are not very good, especially if they're amateur drummers. They're not very good at tuning, and this gets worse with the size of the tom. So the first rack tom is usually quite okay because it's easy to tune. Depending on the size, the second one might still be okay, but most of the time it's the floor tom that's really nasty. And don't get too hung up on trying to get it right with EQing. Learn to hear very quickly that this tom is badly tuned and you will never get it right. So let it go and don't play with it for too long. Maybe if you think, you might ask the drummer if he can do a better job, but since he didn't do it in the first place, he's probably not able to tune it any better, so let it go. Anyway, rack one, it's pretty much, it's a bit like the snare, so I expect the bottom at like 200 hertz, low cut at 150. You usually don't have to take anything off in the low mids for the smaller toms. And then this is 2.3, 2.5. That's actually kind of the stick hit. And then I usually have another attack point around 6K. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention that if you're expecting any advice about noise gates, I stopped using noise gates about 25 years ago because I could never really get it right and it sounded weird. So I stopped it altogether and started using a transit designer. And some desks even now have like a kind of transit designer in their plug-in toolbox. But even if not, then I use nothing. There's one way to work with noise gates the right way, but that will be another video, and that involves triggers. But that's something you would do if you actually work for a band and travel with a band. You wouldn't do that as a local engineer with a band coming in. So if you want advice about noise gates, you will have to ask somebody else. And of course, oh, I forgot about the snare as well. I will send this tom to the drum reverb. Same, of course, for snare top. I don't send snare bottom to the drum reverb. I don't like that. It's just snare top. And also, this tom is panned to my right, to the drummer's left, if he's a right-handed drummer. Rack 2, pretty much the same area. Now, it really depends on the size of the tom. Maybe a bit lower. If toms get bigger, you might have to take out a little bit of low mids. And for the attacks, same thing. Here we have 3 toms, so this will be the center one. No panning, and also send to the reverb. Floor. Well, now here it's pretty much treated more like a kick drum. So pretty low cut, not as deep as for the kick drum, but this is 80 hertz. This is some around 400, and the same attack points. Sent to the reverb and panned all the way to the left, and forgot to send it to the reverb area. Right cymbal. Well, phantom power, low cut. That's it really. Overheads, same thing. I might prepare in case, I mean, let's face it, if we're in a little club, you will hardly ever need the overheads. But if you need them, or if you use them and cymbals are too harsh, around 3.5K, it's really usually a good point to prepare a filter that you can then engage. Bass DI. Well, in this case, we have bass DI and bass mic. So that's a bit different. Let's just say we only have bass DI. So again, nothing is really dialed in, but I have a low cut at 60. I usually find the area where the bass is really warm and nice around 120 hertz, and I will dial that in here. Then there's an area where it's kind of, don't even know how to call it. It gives a lot of tone and makes it more detectable as well, which is usually around 700. And that mostly it. Only in special cases where the bass needs to have some metallic attack, I will bring up something up here. Compressor ratio 6:1, pretty aggressive. The attack depends on if you want to let the first transit through or if you want to capture that as well. Release is around 100. If I do have a bass microphone, I will leave this filter to the bass mic, because this is usually an area where the amp sounds better than the DI. But that's probably the only filter I will have. Of course, I have a low cut, which is higher because I don't want the bottom end from that channel. That comes from here. Same compressor settings. And that's it for the bass. So now we are at the guitar, where we were earlier. Like I told you, it's just a low cut, and then I prepare a few frequencies where they might be helpful. That's it. Acoustic. Now, that's a bit difficult because, first of all, it depends on if this acoustic guitar is the main instrument or if that acoustic guitar is playing in the context of like another electric guitar or even 2 electric guitars or keyboards. If the acoustic guitar is the main instrument, you can set what we want the body, we want the bass, so you can set the low cut around, oh, that's not the low cut. Yeah, 100, 80, 100. You you can prepare it in that area. If it's played against like other instrument, we don't want that because that's just mushy, and so then I would go up to like 160 or so. It's hard to find out before. I mean, you can probably tell if there's a guitar player who has an electric and an acoustic guitar, then it will be the main instrument when it's being played. But if you have the singer playing an acoustic guitar, then it will be most likely played in context with other instruments. So that's the only way you can really tell. But I mean, changing this is no big deal, right? Other than that, what happens frequently, depending on, I mean, let's face it, a DI signal from an acoustic guitar is never really ideal, but that's the usual way you do it. So very often it's a bit nasally, so around this area, 1.2, 1.4. So I just prepare another filter here. Compressor. Very lightly, maybe like 2 to 1. Attack again, that depends on if you want to let the first transient through or not. And release also around 100. And turn it on. No idea why I forgot that. Other than that, well, I will maybe send this guitar to my room reverb. If you remember when we talked about my effects, I have one reverb set up for whatever else there is apart from drums and vocals. So I will send the acoustic guitar to that. I mean, you might also set up a chorus effect or a flanger or like even a little chain. Please yourself. But in this case, there would be one effect dedicated to acoustic guitar. Keyboards, nothing really. They're just in here because it felt odd not to have keyboards in the selection or in the input list of a normal pop rock band. Nothing. There's such a wide variety of keyboard sounds that where to start. The only thing, again, a bit like with the kick drum, I would give it a low cut at like 40. Just again, it's a little safety net in case the keyboard all of a sudden plays a sound with huge sub bass and we don't want to destroy anything. But other than that, what can you do? Now, vocal. Vocal is the other instant where I would use EQ preparing method number 1. Because most of the time, low cut, I set it around 150, 160 for male vocals and 180 for female vocals, but I always play with it. And most of the time, this channel needs a little dip at the low mids as prepared around 350 Hertz usually. And that's pretty much it. I mean, you might find sometimes it's a little harsh, so maybe let's set another EQ at 2.5 again. That's pretty much it. Then I have a compressor at 3 to 1, attack pretty fast because there's no real transient that I want to let through. Release, yeah, pretty standard, 80 to 100. And for the vocals, I will also prepare a de-esser. There's no way I can dial in anything here because I have no idea if it's even needed, and if it's needed, I have no idea where the S is. But I prepare it. And then of course I send my vocal to both my vocal reverb and my delay. And if you remember, I send the delay back into the reverb. So the repeat or the repeats, depending on how you set it up, have the same room around them than the initial signal. Now in this case, let's go to the monitor channel, because unlike any other signal, you will be preparing your vocal channel in the monitors before the band even arrives, right? You will be ringing out your monitors. Now, you could start with a flat channel, but you will still need this low mid dip most of the time. And if you, let's say, if you dial that in on your monitor way EQ, so for the entire mix, then you might take away some of the warmth of other signals. So I would and start it from there. But of course, nothing else on the monitor channel. No reverb, unless if you have people on in-ears, but that's an entire different story. We're talking about a simple wedge mix here. No compressor, don't even dream of using a compressor on the monitors, and that's it. And again, in this video, we didn't talk about subgroups, VCA groups, and mute groups, because like I already said, that's more complex than you might think. There will be an entire video just about that. So that's it for today. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.